Hello YouTube, I'm back. I know it has been a very long time since I have uploaded any new content, but I have a really good excuse. I got really sick really fast, and then I had a lung transplant. Everything happened really quickly. It's been a crazy whirlwind these last few months. We only first started talking about lung transplant in March. Got me on the list, I believe, in April. I was on the list for less than 3 weeks before I got my shiny new lungs. Things were pretty intense. I was in the hospital between March and April for almost 6 weeks straight. Not only could we not get me to improve, I actually got worse over the course of that hospitalization. I felt way worse when I left the hospital than I did when I went in. Nothing was working anymore. I was tapped out when it came to antibiotics, and yeah, there's a reason that they put me on the transplant list. They probably actually would not have sent me home, except that I was really pushing to go home. I wanted very badly to get out of the hospital and to just be home. My theory was, if we can't do anything and I'm just going to be sick and miserable, let me be sick and miserable at home instead of in the hospital, because I thought that I would be more comfortable there. I was wrong, because in the hospital everything was very close to me because I was living in one room. The bathroom was like, 5 feet away, and everything else was pretty much within arm's reach or a couple feet away from me. Also, hospital obviously has hospital quality oxygen availability, so I was able to have the oxygen there very easily available, able to turn it up and down as high as I wanted, whenever I wanted, very easily. Did not really account for the fact that at home you have multiple rooms that you have to navigate between. Not everything is in arm's reach, and the oxygen concentrators that they set me up with at home, they actually had to give me 2 oxygen concentrators and connect them together, because one oxygen concentrator would not give me enough oxygen. And even with that, the oxygen concentrators just weren't as strong as what I could get in the hospital, and weren't enough for me to be able to comfortably navigate from one room to the other. So I thought that being at home, that I would be able to make my own food, be more comfortable, have a little more freedom than in the hospital, even though I would still be really sick, but that I would be more comfortable. Instead, what ended up happening was I couldn't walk without really struggling and being horribly uncomfortable. Just going to the bathroom became a trial every single time, and I pretty much was spending all of my days either in bed or in my recliner, and the only time I moved was to go to the bathroom when I just couldn't avoid moving anymore. When I was sitting, I could almost breathe. The concentrators were strong enough to hold me if I was perfectly still, and as soon as I moved, even with the oxygen concentrators, my oxygen was dropping. So I spent a lot of time, just moaning and being miserable in my chair. It was really not a fun time for anybody involved. Yeah, the whole experience was pretty miserable. And then finally, after a week and a half of just being home and miserable, and for the first time in my life, kind of regretting leaving the hospital and thinking, you know what, maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed in the hospital. So after a week and a half of that, we finally had no choice, because even sitting still, even with the oxygen cranked up all the way to the top, my oxygen was dropping. And so then I also had tanks, which were for me to use if I needed to go out somewhere. If I went out somewhere, not that I was capable of going out anywhere, but if I needed to go somewhere, I had tanks to take with me. The tanks were a little bit stronger then the concentrator, I could like crank it up higher. So when my oxygen was dropping, I put myself on a tank, cranked it up to the max, which is 15 liters, and I still could not breathe. My oxygen was still dropping. So at that point, it was time for a trip to the emergency room. And I got to find out what happens when you go to the ER with a real emergency, because apparently they take not being able to breathe very seriously. Who knew? So I got whisked back right away, not to like a standard ER cot. I got taken back to the like resuscitation unit, which is like where people come in with like gunshots or trauma or like at risk of immediate harm or death or whatever, that they like rush them back and start working on them immediately. Basically what you see like on TV and in the movies as what emergency room looks like. So apparently there is part of the emergency room that looks like that. I never knew that because I'd never been there. When they wheeled me in, there was a team of about 10 doctors, nurses, I don't know what, literally standing there waiting for me, and they wheel me in, and then as soon as I'm in place, they all like jump on me and everybody starts like, this one's getting an IV, and this one's hooking up, the EKG monitor, and this one's hooking up that and whatever, and everybody's all like working on me all at once, very like emergently, like an emergency room. So that was an experience. They put me on high flow oxygen, and I immediately felt much better. My mom and my girlfriend, when they knew that I was okay, when I started cracking jokes with the doctors, they were kind of like, oh, she's back. Because before that, I was just like pale and gasping and had no sense of humor whatsoever. But as soon as they oxygenated me, my sense of humor came back, and I started getting snarky again. And then everybody felt much better because they knew I was gonna be fine. So yeah, managed a week and a half at home before being back in the hospital. I knew as soon as they brought me into the ER, I was like, well, I'm not getting out of the hospital until I get my transplant, because clearly that didn't work. And the doctor pretty much told me, like, yeah, you're here until transplant, especially because high flow oxygen can only be done in the hospital. At a certain point during all of this, I started having oxygen hunger, which apparently is a thing that happens where even if you do have enough oxygen, you still feel like you're suffocating. So that was not fun. Of course, also throughout all this, I was still coughing up massive quantities of mucus, which was disgusting and exhausting. I also couldn't really walk anywhere. I couldn't walk anywhere because I was attached to the high flow oxygen, so that has a very limited range anyway. But even if I wanted to, I couldn't walk anywhere because they had me, they brought me a bedside commode to use, and just getting to the commode and back, and it was literally right next to my bed, was enough to completely exhaust me and leave me gasping and panting for breath. So I was in really bad shape. Things were really not good, and I was honestly really miserable. Really just wanted things to end. Just needed to either, honestly, get the lung transplant or die, because I could not handle the way my existence was at that point. On the plus side, apparently the standard treatment for oxygen hunger is oxycodone. Woohoo! So I was happy with that. I was perfectly happy to just be high until I got my transplant, because being present in reality was really not fun. I came pretty close to maxing out the high flow because my oxygen needs just kept going up and up and up very quickly. High flow, I believe, goes up to 60 liters, and I think I topped out around 55 liters. My doctor let me know that if I exceeded the high flow, that they would have to move me off the regular unit into the ICU, and that they would have to put me on a ventilator, and that if the ventilator was not enough to hold me, that they would have to put me onto ECMO, which is a heart-lung machine where they like put 2 catheters in you, and one like takes out your blood, puts it through the machine oxygenates it, and then the other catheter puts it back into you. And that's not something that you can like live on forever. That's just something to bridge you until you can get your transplant. Thankfully, did not get to that point, because 4 days after I arrived in the ER, I got the call that there were lungs for me. So yeah, things got pretty dicey really, really quickly. Nobody was really expecting that, but apparently my lungs just gave up on life. Thankfully, I now have some new lungs, which have given me a whole new lease on life. Life is much, much better now, and it is really a whole world of difference. But that is going to be another video. I am definitely planning to put together a video about what transplant was like and that whole experience. I plan on bringing my mom and Catherine in here to talk about the parts that I was unconscious / incoherent for. I remember most things. I do not remember my time in the ICU post-transplant. I have like brief memories or impressions of that time, but apparently there's a whole lot more went on that I had no clue was happening. I am very grateful that I am here and making this video, and that I will be able to make more videos and continue talking about this. So stay tuned for continued installments in my lung transplant adventures.